Good evening and welcome to the 603rd episode of Travel Itch. I'm Dan Schlossberg and we are in our 14th season of Travel Itch Radio, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel from the comfort of your armchair. Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality, from authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists. If it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travel Itch. Our guest today is Tim Riley of the America's National Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri. Welcome, Tim, to the new video Travel Itch.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's so good to be back, and this time talking to you and seeing you in video. It's wonderful.
Thanks so much. I feel the same way. The obvious question, Tim, is why is there an American museum dedicated to a British prime minister, and why is it located in Missouri?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the one we hear most frequently here in Fulton, Missouri. We're located in Fulton, Missouri, which is really about almost equidistant between St. Louis and Kansas City, in the middle of the state, in the middle of America, really in the heartland. And we are often asked, why is America's National Churchill Museum, which is a little bit like a presidential library for a British prime minister, located in Fulton, Missouri? And the quick answer is we asked Churchill to come here. We're located on the campus of Westminster College. And right after World War II, we asked Churchill, who had been voted out of office, out of a job, to come and speak here. And he delivered his famous post-war Iron Curtain speech, where he warned that an iron curtain had descended across the continent and warned Americans and the world, really, of the looming threat of Soviet communism. And that happened here on this campus. So the museum and the memorial to Churchill and that historic speech, the beginning of the Cold War era, if you will, is here because Churchill came here and gave that seminal and most important speech in Fulton, Missouri. So the museum is here because of Churchill.
And the museum is on the campus of Westminster College, which also has a famous sculpture and a reconstructed church. Please share.
Yes, I mean, it's incredible. You know, the Iron Curtain speech was Churchill being very prescient. You know, he saw something in 1946 before many others did, that the Soviet Union, who had been allies during World War II, could be adversaries, and warned of an Iron Curtain descending. And the college, 20 years later, in the early 1960s, realized, that speech that Churchill made on this campus at Westminster College predicted the Cold War. We really ought to do something. We ought to memorialize and put up a marker to designate the importance of this speech. And as you can imagine, in an academic setting, a committee was formed. And someone said, let's put up a statue, let's put up a plaque. And then the college president said something, he had an audacious idea, really. He said, why don't we bring from London a war-torn, scarred church that was bombed in World War II by the Germans during the Blitz of World War II, left in ruins. Why don't we bring it to the heartland of America and rebuild it on the Westminster College campus, and as a memorial to Winston Churchill? And that's what they did. It was a national effort to bring the ruined church of St. Mary Aldermanbury, which was designed by Christopher Wren, the great British architect who designed St. Paul's Cathedral, and reconstruct it in Fulton as a tribute to Churchill and his speech. It's an incredible story, and that really is the centerpiece of the museum, which is located underneath in the Undercroft, in the underground bunker, if you will, beneath the church. But a London church that is historic in its own right found its way to Missouri to honor Churchill.
What will visitors find in the Churchill Museum?
All sorts of things. As I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit like a presidential library for a British prime minister. We explore the whole life and legacy from birth to death of Winston Churchill, his famous father, Lord Randolph Churchill, and his mother, who was American. His mother was from Brooklyn, Winston Churchill's mother. But then chronologically, we look at Churchill in the First World War, his leadership in the Second World War, and of course his time here in Fulton in the Cold War era. That's what we explore. So it's a soup to nuts examination of Churchill and his legacy by looking at original documents, interactive displays. You walk in the World War I area. You had that slide just a moment ago of Churchill in the trench. This is, we forget that Winston Churchill served in the First World War. First as First Lord of the Admiralty, he was in charge of the largest navy in the world, and he was forced to resign after the horrible and disastrous Dardanelles campaign. But you couldn't keep Churchill down, so he went into the trenches and took up a commission. And so you see you walk through a trench here at the museum to explore that part of Churchill's legacy. And we also have, of course, the church itself, the St. Mary Aldermanbury Wren Church in all its splendor is his destination. Sculptures, papers, paintings of Winston Churchill. We have a near final copy draft of the Iron Curtain speech that people can see and look to put yourself inside the mind of the statesman as he was trying to articulate to the world, finding the right words. And he always seemed to find the right words to warn of the threat. Now, all of these things and more are here displayed in a fashion that are interactive, videos and displays. It's really where history can come alive. We're quite proud of that.
Well, Churchill actually was the one who warned the Brits about the Nazis too, long before World War II broke out. Then he did the same thing about the Russians after the war. So he was pretty much a visionary, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, Churchill had this capacity to almost see around corners and see things before others did, and I think that's part of the genius of the man. He looked to history to find patterns, learned from them, and said, we might watch out for this. And you're absolutely right. In the 1930s, as a parliamentarian, he was a member of the House of Commons, but has no authority, no ministerial power. He saw this upstart, young, charismatic leader in Germany named Adolf Hitler building up arms. And he began to warn anyone who would listen. And unfortunately for Britain and the world, not many listened, that the Nazi Party was a looming threat. As finally, of course, at the end of the decade in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, finally they said to Churchill, you really ought to come back into government and into cabinet. And then, of course, by May of 1940, he's prime minister and has a fight on his hands. But he had been warning for a decade. And you're absolutely right. He did the same thing in Fulton. Right after the war, he warned of an Iron Curtain. And for many Americans, it was an unusual statement because the Soviet Union had been allies in the Second World War and lost millions and millions and millions of soldiers in the defense of Europe in the Second World War. And here comes Churchill to Fulton saying, I think we got to pay attention to Stalin and this ideological conflict, which really began the Cold War era. It was Churchill's perhaps greatest strength is to see patterns and to look at the global stage and anticipate what might be coming. Prescience is a great way to describe Churchill.
What is the connection between the Berlin Wall and Churchill's Iron Curtain speech? And didn't Churchill's granddaughter design the enormous sculpture?
She did. Outside the museum, we have the Christopher Wren Church, this great, wonderful 17th century monument that was reconstructed. But behind it, we have a piece of the Berlin Wall. The stately church is surrounded by this graffiti-clad section of the Berlin Wall, the concrete manifestation of the Iron Curtain that Churchill warned about. Ultimately was built. When Churchill came in 46, it was a metaphor. There was no wall in 46, but it was built in the 1960s. Came down famously in November of 1989 and was 1 year, actually, to the date. November 9, 1990, we dedicated a sculpture made by Churchill's granddaughter. You're absolutely right. Edwina Sands is her name, to commemorate the Iron Curtain speech. But the difference between the wall in Berlin and the wall in Fulton is that here you can walk through it. The artist has carved out these abstract male and female figures, and you can literally break through the formidable barrier that once divided the West and East Berlin. And it's a symbol for peace and freedom, and it's a full circle moment that Churchill's granddaughter built this amazing sculpture on the campus where her grandfather delivered the Iron Curtain speech from behind that lectern. By the way, you just saw this.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's part of our story too. The museum is not a fixed point in time. History keeps happening as time marches on, and we keep adding to the museum and its story to tell and to make the past come alive for current generations.
Wasn't it originally called the Sinews of Peace speech?
Yes, we call it today the Iron Curtain speech because of Churchill's warning. But you're absolutely right. Churchill's title for the speech was called The Sinews of Peace. And what are sinews? Sinews are things that make us stronger, that bind us together in the body. And Churchill's idea was that democratic nations like the United States and Great Britain, which he was the ultimate ambassador for, could be partners and allies. The special relationship that we talk about every time there's a new prime minister, there's a new president, we talk about the history of the special relationship between Britain and America. Well, that phrase was introduced here in the Sinews of Peace speech. And Churchill's concept was that the sinews, the strength of our two countries and democratic nations could make the world stronger and safer. So he titled his speech "The Sinews of Peace," and it's a warning about communism, but more so, it's really advocates the power of freedom and democracy, and that's what the speech was.
When did Churchill deliver the speech, and does the museum have artifacts from that day?
We do. March 5th, 1946, and it was an afternoon in the gymnasium on the Westminster College campus, which was the largest building on campus at the time. President Truman was at his side, Missouri's own, and he delivered from that lectern, which we have on display in the museum. He delivered the speech that really changed the course of the 20th century in the world, the prescience that Churchill had, and launched the Cold War era. And we do have a near final copy of the draft. We have other letters, papers, tickets, memorabilia, banners. It seemed like the entire state of Missouri showed up to catch a glimpse of the parade as Truman and Churchill paraded through town. And Fulton is a small town. I mean, today it's 12,000 people. It's a small town, so it was a big deal to have the former prime minister and the president visit. And we've got a host of items and artifacts, videos about that day and its importance on display in the museum.
We're talking with Tim Riley about the National Churchill Museum. Tim, how did the college convince Churchill to come there? And was it because President Truman was also from Missouri, had agreed to come?
Exactly right. The college to this day has something called the John Finley Green Foundation Lectureship. There's some money in the budget every year to bring a prominent speaker to campus. And the college president in the summer of 1945 was vacationing up in Minnesota on one of the 10,000 lakes. And the college president was named Frank McClure. He said, "Who should we invite to give the Green Lecture?" And his wife, Ida Bell McClure, said, "How about Winston Churchill?" That was exactly the pause, dead silence. Are you kidding me? But they did. They wrote a letter, a one-page typewritten letter to Winston Churchill, who had won the war but just lost an election. It's hard for Americans to realize that after World War II, Churchill, one of the most famous figures in the world with his famous V for Victory and cigars and speeches, was out of a job. And he received this letter from plucky little Westminster College in the heartland saying, "Why don't you come speak?" I'm convinced that the letter would have been given to an aide and secretary, and politely, a no, thank you, but I'm flattered you asked letter would have been sent in reply. However, in the bottom of this page was a handwritten note that said, "This is a wonderful school in my home state. If you come, I'll introduce you. Regards, Harry Truman." So when the president of the United States endorsed this, Churchill, who had just lost an election, was down in the dumps, said, I have more to say, and if the president of the United States is at my side, the world will tune in. And that's exactly what happened. So it was a plucky idea, a bold, audacious invitation, and probably one of the most famous postscripts in the 20th century.
Let's hear about the history of the church, Tim. We hear it's 1,000 years old and was once destroyed by Nazi bombs in London.
It was. The earliest traces of St. Mary Aldermanbury in London is from the 1180s, so it's almost 900 years old. It stood proudly in London. It was a terrific monument. It was Shakespeare lived a block away, and John Milton was married in the church. It has its illustrious history, both good and bad. And I guess the first real bad chapter was in 1666 during the Great Fire of London. Aldermanbury was burned down. It was really that King Charles II, we're now on the third, but King Charles II asked Christopher Wren, this famed architect in Britain, to rebuild 50 or so churches, including St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he rebuilt Aldermanbury in the 1670s in London. It stood proudly in London for hundreds more years until December 29th, 1940, when during the Blitz of World War II, the Germans dropped 20,000 bombs, incendiary bombs, over London. It rained down fire. Churchill said to, who was prime minister at the time, said, "At all costs, save St. Paul's." They did. But Aldermanbury suffered a different fate, and it was bombed and destroyed and burned and left in ruins. Only a stone shell of the building remained the night after the bombing. It was that church that was rebuilt ultimately in our campus at Westminster College to honor Churchill. So it has a long and distinguished and extraordinarily tragic history in some cases, but it's a symbol of resilience. It always comes back, like Churchill. You knock him down, always gets back up.
How are the surviving stones moved from England to Missouri? I know, very carefully.
Very carefully. Although you'd like to think that. Unfortunately, they weren't. Every stone was numbered meticulously in London. Scaffolding was erected, and they numbered every stone. They cleaned it in London. They shipped it across the Atlantic. And when they were unloading the stones in Fulton, it traveled from the East Coast by rail car to Missouri. As they were unloading the stones, unfortunately, the numbering system that they had meticulously done with the lower numbers on the bottom, so they know how to put the puzzle together, they all got mixed up. So it was a great chore to put them back together. The Sunday Times of London, when the project was complete, called it the greatest jigsaw puzzle in the history of architecture. So you say very carefully, but unfortunately there were some mishaps. But in true Churchillian fashion, there was perseverance, and they found a way to put it all back together again. And that's an extraordinary testament for those great craftsmen from the 1960s, both in Britain and America, who made this monument happen.
You mentioned, Tim, that the museum presents the full narrative of Churchill's life, including some of his setbacks in World War I. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. Churchill's rise in politics from 1900 to the beginning of the First World War in the 19 teens was meteoric. He was a natural. He was a gifted orator, as we know, and he was in his 30s, rose to the ranks of First Lord of the Admiralty, which was one of the largest and most important jobs in the cabinet. He was the equivalent of the Secretary of Navy for the largest fleet in the world. The Royal Navy was the largest fleet in the world. And Churchill had a bold idea to send the fleet into the Straits of the Dardanelles in 1914-15 to knock the Ottoman Turks out of the First World War, believing that if that happened, they could relieve the pressures in the trenches and the mechanized warfare of tanks and machine guns and shelling and barbed wire, all those kinds of things would then be diminished. Unfortunately for Churchill, the plan to send the fleet into the Dardanelles failed. It was a catastrophic failure. And this politician and leader who had made such great strides so quickly in his young life, in his 30s, was out of a job. He was forced to resign his position. And it was a major setback, a great blow for Winston Churchill. His family worried about his mental health. He suffered from situational depression. He called it his black dog. And some of his family members wondered if he'd recover. But he did. He did. And as I mentioned earlier, he went into the trenches and ultimately rehabilitated his reputation, ended up back in London as a junior minister and cabinet member, and rebuilt his legacy. It's really just an amazing story of resilience.
We're talking with Tim Riley about the National Churchill Museum. Tim, tell us about the museum's Gathering Storm Room.
The Gathering Storm Room is that area where we look at the 1930s, that period when Winston Churchill is a member of Parliament, out of office, a ministerial office. He has no power, and he's a backbencher in Parliament. And Churchill receives intelligence from British sources, but also German sources, guests who are coming and fleeing Germany, including Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein traveled to Britain, visited Churchill at his home in the 1930s, and said, Hitler is a bad man, and could you help us find employment for these great scholars and scientists in British universities, because the rise of the Nazi Party is making it impossible for us to live. And Churchill in the 1930s really witnesses what he called the gathering storm of the Nazi menace, and uses broadcasts, radio, speeches to try to warn anyone who would listen. But the policy of the day in Britain was appeasement. The First World War loomed large in the memory of most Britons, including those in government, and there was no appetite for further conflict. So Churchill's warnings for most of the 30s, as the storm was gathering, and Churchill said we need to be vigilant, unfortunately fell on deaf ears until the very end of the decade when the war broke out, Second World War.
I loved watching the news with Walter Cronkite every night when I was a kid. Your museum is a film narrated by the late, great CBS newsman. Tell us about it.
Yes, Walter Cronkite was an eyewitness and reporter during World War II at the Battle of Britain, his famous broadcasts from England. He saw firsthand what happened there, and he recorded, shortly before he died, a number of years ago, he recorded a short film narrated. It's about a 12-minute film that talks about the history of World War II, and to have the most trusted newsman in America, in Cronkite, narrate it. But one of his colleagues actually also was involved with Churchill, and that's Edward R. Murrow, another CBS newsman who is quoted in the museum. He said during the war that as the war broke out and England was standing alone and Churchill was prime minister, Murrow said of Churchill, he mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. Those great famous speeches. So American journalists, Cronkite and Murrow, play a large part in the story of Winston Churchill, that's for sure.
A great statesman known for quips and comments, Churchill was not only a charismatic leader, but a character cartoonists love. How does the museum present that picture? In a wit and wisdom room?
We do. Churchill was his own best PR man, I'm convinced. He knew where every camera was, and he invited the characters, the V for victory with his famous signal that he did with his hand, or the cigar, the hats. He wanted to stand out, and he did so, and it made him a favorite. And of course, his speeches, his words stood out in Parliament whenever he spoke. He was such a gifted orator. But he was a complete package, and cartoonists, photographers captured Churchill more than I think any other official in the history of the 20th century. And he knew it. Famously, coming into town in Fulton before the Iron Curtain speech, there was a parade. And just outside of town, before the thousands who gathered to catch a glimpse, Churchill leaned over to the driver and said, "Please stop the car." And he did. And Churchill pulled a cigar out of his coat pocket and said, "Thank you, sir. I need to light this cigar, and I can't do it in the wind because the people will be expecting it." So those gimmicks, those images, Churchill knew about and used to good effect. And we have displays and countless photographs, images, cartoons in the museum that show Churchill and the results of that effort.
This is Travel Itch with Dan Schlossberg. We're in our 14th season. We've passed our 600th episode, and we're live at 5 New York time every Thursday on LinkedIn, YouTube, WhatsApp, X, and Facebook, among others. And we're talking with Tim Riley about the National Churchill Museum. Tim, perhaps the most significant room in your museum is the Sinews of Peace room, which tells why such a big personality would come to such a tiny college far from the big cities in limelight. Let's hear a little bit more.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. It clearly, it reflects what happened here, but also looks at what happened, the effects of the speech globally. That one speech that lasted 50 minutes, 50. You can hear a glimpse of it in the Sinews of Peace Gallery. We're living with the legacy of the Iron Curtain speech even today. The Iron Curtain, up until a few years ago, was a history lesson, but after the fairly recent Russian invasion into Ukraine, it's now a headline again. And this speech is more meaningful today, I think, than ever. Almost 80 years ago. Next year will be the 80th anniversary of the Iron Curtain speech. But you can see the lectern from behind which the Churchill speech took place, but also learn about some of the other leaders who have followed Churchill to Fulton. President Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Margaret Thatcher, all those three leaders who were involved in the end of the Cold War, all came to Fulton. Gorbachev spoke from the same lectern that Churchill used in 1946 to declare the end of the Cold War in 1992. And all of that can be found. So the speech is not just a fixed point in time, but it's a living document in some ways that continues to inform and inspire us. And all of that can be seen in the museum.
How long after the Berlin Wall came down did the sculpture open at your museum?
1 year to the day. It's extraordinary.
Wow.
It's extraordinary.
Wow.
President Reagan came to dedicate it 1 year. And this is the president who, during his presidency, said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And ironically, it came down. But then here's President Reagan, former president at the time, in 1990, November 9th, dedicating this monument that he said, tear it down in Berlin. And he saw it go back up as a sculpture to peace in Fulton, Missouri, in America's heartland. It's an incredible thought.
We understand that Westminster College has several lecture series that attract politicians, business leaders, and academics. Are there any noteworthy celebrities coming later this year?
Stay tuned. I'm not at liberty to tell you, but we will be celebrating and commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Iron Curtain speech. And these round number milestone anniversaries are great occasions for us to bring folks to campus. The 50th anniversary of the Iron Curtain speech, we had Margaret Thatcher here, and we've got big plans to celebrate and commemorate 80, because I think the ideas and ideals that Churchill talked about in the Iron Curtain speech, as I mentioned earlier a moment ago, continue to be relevant. And stay tuned. So check out our website and follow along. We'll certainly commemorate in fine fashion next March.
Would you say the museum emphasizes British history, American history, or a bit of both?
Both. Churchill said, rather in a pithy statement, I am myself an English-speaking Union, because his mother was American and his father was British. I think that Anglo-American relationship, the special relationship that we talk about, was coined in the Iron Curtain speech, and I think you see both. And for Churchill, it was the ideas of democracy and the shared, from the Magna Carta to habeas corpus to systems of law and constitutions, the Declaration of Independence. Those are all values of the rights of man and freedom of speech and so forth. Those were the things that Churchill held dear. And those are the things that both the UK and the US to this day hold dear. So it's that Anglo-American relationship that is shown in equal parts here.
For viewers thinking about coming, when is the best time to come, and how would they get there?
Well, we're located in the middle of Missouri. The closest major airport is St. Louis, and we're about a 90-minute drive along I-70 to Fulton. A smaller regional airport is in Columbia, where the University of Missouri is. That's about a half hour away, and it's fairly easy to get to. I think sometimes there's a perception that we're in the middle of America in a small rural town, but I always say that if Winston Churchill can make the trip, and we can bring a Christopher Wren church from London, so can you make the trip. And people do in increasing numbers. It's really a great place to visit, a destination, and a charming town, by the way. I live in Fulton, and the brick district downtown and the businesses and restaurants is a lovely town. And the historic gymnasium where Churchill actually gave the speech on Westminster College campus is also here to see. So in addition to the museum, you can go see where the speech took place. The good news for historians is that the speech looks like, the gym rather, looks like it did in 1946. You can almost hear Churchill's words still echoing in that hall. I suppose the mixed news for the athletes who perform in it today is that it looks like it did in 1946. But it's really a terrific place and a wonderful and a national landmark in its own right. So we encourage everyone to make the trip and experience a little bit of this not only national history but a global history place that keeps happening. That keeps happening by nature of the visitors who continue to come, the leaders who continue to follow in Churchill's footsteps to Westminster College. It's all part of the experience. It's a living museum. I like to say to the team here that if history seems old, we're not doing our job. We need to make it come alive and learn from it so we can continue to build a better future by learning from the past.
Tim, how did Travel Itch viewers get more information about the National Churchill Museum?
All the information is on our website, nationalchurchillmuseum.org, and any exhibitions, special exhibitions we have, hours, prices. But it's also a great resource if you want to learn about the Iron Curtain speech or Churchill. There's a whole host of activities and things on the website that people can use to learn more, not only about the museum, but about Churchill and his legacy.
Our guest today has been Tim Riley of the National Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri. Thank you, Tim, for visiting with us on Travel Itch.
Well, my pleasure, Dan. It's always great to talk to you, and I hope we can see you here one of these days very soon.
And viewers, with the All-Star Game and Hall of Fame induction weekend approaching, this is the perfect time to share the excitement with my latest book, The New Baseball Bible, Notes, Nuggets, Lists, and Legends from Our National Pastime. Both a bathroom book and a coffee table book. It's an unorthodox, illustrated history that is really everything you want to know about baseball, but we're afraid to ask. That's The New Baseball Bible. Get it today on Amazon.com. That's it for this edition of Travel Itch. This is your host and writer, Dan Schlossberg, saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time, join us next week when our guest will be Gus Constantine, General Manager of the Palmer House Hilton, a Chicago-based member of Historic Hotels of America. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, thanks for watching, good evening, and stay safe.